Okay. Well, thank you everybody for coming here today. Sound good? Video good? All right. Above all, I would like to extend my sincere gratitude to Leonard Peikoff, whose two-part lecture series entitled Poems I Like and Why, delivered in 1999 in California, inspired this course. Many of the poems from Dr. Peikoff's course appear here. Some of the points I will make with respect to interpreting and appreciating the poems are from Dr. Peikoff's course and were initially made by him. This course also contains many poems that did not feature in Dr. Peikoff's course, and vice versa. Attendees interested in learning more are advised to listen to both Dr. Peikoff's lectures on YouTube. A recording of this session will also be made available on my YouTube channel, Maxim Bishev. Thank you to my objectivist friends for co-funding this event. Thank you to my friend Robin Waldun for recording this session, thus making it possible for admirers of poetry around the world to see it in the future. And thank you to Kristan Oud and the team at Oud Art Gallery, Saskia, for generously lending me this beautiful space, the aesthetic quality of which provides the ideal setting for the poetic journey on which we are about to embark. I'll begin with some remarks on poetry in general. Poetry, as Dr. Peikoff describes, is the form of art whose medium is the sound of concepts. As such, it is an art form combining music and literature. In my view, this art form reached its zenith in the 18th and 19th century, both thematically and stylistically. By implication, and contrary to popular opinion, I do not regard Shakespeare as the greatest poet, or even as the representative of the greatest poetic era. He was brilliant, to be sure, and I have included some of his sonnets in this course. But he ultimately regarded life as fatalistic, and a man as deterministically doomed to failure and defeat, and man as deterministically doomed to failure and defeat, even if he manages to gain some values along the way. The greatest poetry flourished in the Enlightenment, then through the Victorian era, up to as late as the early 20th century. Its themes, best exemplified by Rudyard Kipling, Alfred Lord Tennyson, and Percy Shelley, stress an integrated view of life and the upward striving of man in a universe that facilitates this growth. Specifically, they include free will, self-governance, both metaphysically and politically, reason, and free romantic love, liberated from the collectivistic pressures of aristocracy, social convention, and statism. But we know that in the tree of human knowledge and in the development of history, art is not the decisive factor. Art reflects and reinforces the artist's underlying premises. Where do the premises come from? Philosophy. If philosophy flourishes, so does art, albeit with a short delay. Unfortunately, the same is true in the other direction. The very era to which I am referring as being the greatest era of poetry was also a disaster in the field of philosophy, in which a little Prussian man in frail health named Immanuel Kant was busy exploiting all the errors made by the rationalist and empiricist schools of philosophy and reconciling these errors, all of these errors, into a conclusion that alleged to prove that our means of perception are barriers to perception. That since we must perceive reality somehow, we do not perceive it at all. Who thought it more likely that we impose 12 innate concepts on the objects of our perception than that we actually see the things that are there. It doesn't take much integrating to see that this separation of reason and reality would lead to disasters in the field of art. As an example, here is a poem by John Ashbery titled "A Blue Anchor Grains of Grit in a Tall Sky Sowing." A blue anchor grains of grit in a tall sky sowing. I inch and only sometimes as far as the twisted pole gone in spare colours, Too late, the last express passes through the dust of gardens. This is aesthetic bankruptcy of the lowest sort. Actually, I take that back. Others don't even use real words. Others have resorted to using poetry not as art, but as propaganda. An eloquent example of the current state of poetry is provided by my own experience when I was seeking out this venue. When I informed the gallery owner that I was looking for a beautiful place to read poetry, he asked if I intended to recite pro-Hamas propaganda. And I am sorry to say that given the intellectual, moral, and aesthetic state of our culture, this was quite a reasonable question on his part. My purpose this afternoon, however, is to prove to you that poetry, at its best, is a magnificent art form and has helped me to appreciate the best of times and persevere through the worst. I have compiled a list of 42 poems, plus some bonus short poems, including a few I wrote. I don't expect us to get through all of them today, and I would invite you to share your thoughts as I proceed. A full collection of these poems will be available for purchase over there after the session. I encourage you to share your interpretations. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, I wish to conclude my preliminary remarks and warmly invite you to enjoy my presentation, my favorite poems of all time. Thank you. Okay, we can be informal now. I'm not going to read them in order. I think I'll try to detect what might be appropriate next, and we'll go like that, okay? This one's called Others by Charles Badger Clark. Charles Badger Clark was a 19th century American cowboy poet, one of my favorites. And this poem has him writing about his brother who died in war. The daybreak comes so pure and still. He said that I was pure as dawn. That day we climbed to Signal Hill, back there before the war came on. God, keep me pure as he is brave and fit to take his name. I let him go and fight to save some other girl from shame. Across the gulch it glimmers white, the little house we plotted for. We would be sitting there tonight if he had never gone to war. The firelight and crickets cheep, my arm around his neck. I let him go and fight to keep some other home from wreck. And every day I ride to town, the wide lands talk to me of him, the slopes of pine trees marching down, the spread out prairies, blue and dim. He loved it for the freedom's sake, almost as he loved me. I let him go and fight to make some other country free. What do people think of that poem?
I like it. It's nice and clear. And it's a clear thing, and it's stylistic choices are quite clear. It's not incoherent, and it's not. I mean, I'm not an expert on poems. I'm not really into them. So
he seems to be valuing his brother very highly, right? And so he mourns the loss, and he's bitter about the fact that it was all for nothing, that he fought to make some other country free. All right, here's another very serious one. This one's called Mourn Not the Dead by Ralph Chaplin. This is a poem about courage. Mourn not the dead that in the cool earth lie, dust unto dust, the calm sweet earth that mothers all who die, as all men must. Mourn not your captive comrades who must dwell, too strong to strive, each in a steel-bound coffin of a cell, buried alive, but rather mourn the apathetic throng, the coward and the meek, who see the world's great anguish and its wrong, and dare not speak. Now, I actually wrote a poem inspired by that. It's called Courage. Grieve not the innocent who lie in cobbled cells, awaiting execution. Grieve not the liar's wretched conscience, which oft in moonlight frets, too black for absolution. But grieve the meek and placid, who never faced the enemy with strife, who never blocked the plight of evil, and drifted passively, without conviction, through this life. And I sense now's probably the time to read a different kind of poem. This one will be from Ogden Nash. He was a 20th century satirical poet. This one's called I Do, I Will, I Have. And I'm sure you'll appreciate the change of tone. How wise I am to have instructed the butler to instruct the first footman, to instruct the second footman, to instruct the doorman to order my carriage. I'm about to volunteer a definition of marriage. Just as I know that there are two Hagans, Walter and Copen, I know that marriage is a legal and religious alliance entered into by a man who can't sleep with the window shut and a woman who can't sleep with the window open. Is anyone here married? Stuart's married. Okay, we have one married person here. Okay. Moreover, just as I am unsure of the difference between flora and fauna and flotsam and jetsam, I am quite sure that marriage is the alliance of two people, one of whom never remembers birthdays and the other who never forgets them. And he refuses to believe there is a leak in the water pipe or the gas pipe, and she is convinced that she is about to asphyxiate or drown. And she says, quick, get up and get my hairbrushes off the windowsill, it's raining in. And he replies, oh, it's all right, it's only raining straight down. This is why marriage is so much more interesting than divorce. Because it's the only known example of a happy meeting between an immovable object and an irresistible force. So I hope husbands and wives will continue to debate and combat over everything debatable and compatible, because I believe a little incompatibility is the spice of life, particularly if he has income and she is patable. So that's the style of Ogden Nash. Very, really brilliant. Apparently he used to think in rhyme, and that's why he was so good. He wrote many very good poems. Even a short one, for example, the cow is of the bovine ilk, one end is moo, the other milk. You know, things like that.
Max, I'm just curious, when you said you used to think in rhyme, you said that when he was speaking in everyday conversation, he'd just break out into rhyme.
I'm not sure if he did that, but I do know that he used to think his thoughts in a manner that rhymed. You know, you think in sentences probably, but his sentences rhymed. Yeah, so he was a good poet. All right. Now a political poem. This one's called Retaliation by Oliver Goldsmith. It's actually not so political. It's more kind of satirical. It's about Edmund Burke. You know Edmund Burke, the philosopher politician. And the idea is Edmund was too smart for his own good, and when he tried to enter politics, it went as you would expect. Here lies our good, this is the epitaph, so he's been buried, they're reading the eulogy. Here lies our good Edmund, whose genius was such, we scarcely can praise it, nor blame it too much. Who, born for the universe, narrowed his mind, and to party gave up what was meant for mankind. Who, fraught with all learning, yet straining his throat to persuade Tommy Townsend to lend him a vote. Who, too deep for his hearers, still went on refining and thought of convincing while they thought of dining. Though equal to all things, for all things unfit, too nice for a statesman, too proud for a wit, For a patriot too cool, for a drudge disobedient, and too fond of the right to pursue the expedient. So what's the theme of this poem? What do people think?
An unappreciated genius.
Yeah, that's part of it, yeah, for sure. But it's a genius who, I think, foolishly went into politics. Really shouldn't have gone into that field. Because he was surrounded by people who just disappointed him and he couldn't live down to them, right?
Yeah, because wasn't that like an arch, like conservative who was just educated in the most ridiculous manner, and those kind of forms fail to apply to the world politics, like too proud to be a wit, because there's a lot of rhetoric that goes into political persuasion. So it's the failure to connect those two different worlds. It is as if you're trying to crash down, for example, pure reason to practical reason. There's a disjunction between the two worlds.
Yeah, that's right. So yeah, his whole attitude to life and his moral values conflicted with what was required by the kind of career he foolishly went into. And he kind of thought he could actualize all this change, but he realized that the people he was dealing with were so unenlightened that he had no hope, really.
So, like, the question I have is it his mind that's too narrow, or his contemporaries? Because it started with his mind's too narrow.
It said he, born for the universe, narrowed his mind, and to party gave up what was meant for mankind. So the idea is he should have been a universal genius, and he just devoted himself to this thing that was intellectually beneath him. That's the idea. Okay, now a true classic by William Shakespeare. And for the objectivists in the audience, you can think about, and McGann, you can think about Peter Keating and how he feels toward Catherine Halsey, right? When in disgrace with fortune and men's eyes, I all alone beweep my outcast state, and trouble deaf heaven with my bootless cries, and look upon myself and curse my fate, wishing me like to one more rich in hope, featured like him with friends possessed, desiring this man's art and that man's scope, with what I most enjoy contented least. Yet in these thoughts myself almost despising, haply I think on thee, and then my state, like to the lark at break of day arising from sullen earth, sings hymns at heaven's gate. For thy sweet love remembered such wealth brings, that then I scorn to change my state with kings. Now, I think this might be a good poem to discuss a little, because when I first heard it, I was quite confused. Can anyone here relate? Yeah, okay, everyone else has got it. Yeah, all right, good. Well, Lockie, what did you think of the poem?
That was good, I think, yeah. I'm surprised that Shakespeare is quite coherent. Obviously, with his plays and everything, it's being from quite long ago, it's a little bit more cryptic, I guess, or hard to understand, but yeah, that's quite clear as well. But, yeah.
If you guys are interested, I can tell you some insights I have about this poem.
Yes.
Yeah? Okay, sure. So let's look at where he begins. He's disgraced, which means he has outsourced his pride to the opinions of others. He's second-handed, yep. I all alone beweep my outcast state. He really cares about the fact that he's outcast. It determines his self-esteem. And trouble deaf heaven with my bootless cries appeals to a metaphysical, false authority to deal with his problems rather than acting in the world. And look upon myself and curse my fate. So he's a determinist, believes this is necessary, this is what had to happen. Discounts agency and choice. Desiring this man's art and that man's scope. Art, I think, refers not to art, but to what the person has, the actuality of what that man has that he envies. And then this man's scope is all the opportunities that this other man has. So he wants what this man has, and he wants all the opportunities open to that man. With what I most enjoy, contented least. He doesn't know his values. Yet in these thoughts, myself almost despising, which is what he deserves. Haply I think on thee. So suddenly, unbidden, I think about you. And this is kind of how I think Peter Keating feels about, Peter Keating, the character from The Fountainhead, feels toward Catherine Halsey, the only real value in his life, which he completely destroys and fails to attain and corrupts his relationship with, because he's primarily motivated by the desire to please other people rather than to pursue his own values. Now, this is interesting. Haply I think on thee. So suddenly I think about you. Imagine Peter Keating thinking of Catherine. And then my state, my psychological state, rises up, like to the lark, the little bird, at break of day arising from sullen earth, starts off in the ground, sings hymns at heaven's gate. For thy sweet love remembered such wealth brings, that then I scorn to change my state with kings. So finally, there's a little hint of egoism, of what he really wants, and he knows that even thinking about this brings him more joy than if he were a king. And he wouldn't trade places. Does that help? Is it, okay. And by the way, this is just my interpretation, which I think is correct, but yeah, sorry?
It has many parallels to The Great Gatsby as well.
The Great Gatsby? Why is that?
Gatsby is always wanting everything, like the man has built himself from nothing into a reflection of everything that, you know, the perfect man, the ideal man, according to the American dream, would have and want. But it's always for Daisy, and it's always about her, and he's that kind of point of happiness for her. Even the idea of the sunrise and the lark kind of reminds me of the green light at the end of it.
Interesting. That's a fascinating parallel. Yeah, thank you, Caitlin. Yeah.
Can I ask, how would you distill the theme of that particular poem?
If I had to put it in one sentence,
Or even one word, or a handful of words?
I can do a sentence. It would be social dependence trumping egoistic values.
I don't get that. I think it's the work of love. I think he's saying I'm in such a terrible position, and yet nonetheless, my love for you brings me up out of all of that misery. So that's the focus of it.
But he doesn't act on it. You see, it brings his spirit up to think about it, but it doesn't go on to say he does anything.
But I don't think you need that, do you? I mean, it's a poem purely about a psychological state. I just think that the meaning is clear. I think he's talking about how terrible my life is, yet nonetheless, when I think of you, all of a sudden life is good.
But what makes his life terrible is the fact that he has outsourced his view of himself to others. It's got nothing to do with any kind of objective circumstances.
I think that's clear. But I'm not even sure that's clear. I mean, yeah, I disagree.
I'm convinced by the conclusion.
By my conclusion?
No, by the conclusion of the poem. So he stated how corrupt he is and sees this hint of, you know, brilliance or beauty in somebody else. But he's so corrupt already that, you know, especially if I'm thinking of Peter Keating, you know, how destructive he is to his values. I feel, you know, this is not going anywhere either. The person's so corrupt, they can't really go anywhere with their values, and they're going to let that feeling of beauty and love here just fade away into nothing.
But why do you... But that's not the point of it. The corruption is not the point of it. And why do you say... how can we conclude he's not doing anything?
Because the poem ends.
Guys, maybe we'll come back to Sonnet 29, because, yeah. But I'm really glad that we're engaging with the poetry.
I got one point on the stylistics. So over here, with what I most enjoy contentedly is getting these thoughts, myself I was despising. So there's a pair of alliteration with what, these thoughts. But before it's almost written like it's a very consistent iambic pentameter. But boom, but boom, but boom, but boom. But with over here, it's almost as if you reach that point where you realize he is thinking. So you're coming up with that with what, which kind of breaks the iambic scheme.
And how does that affect the way it should be interpreted thematically?
Thematically, it might just be a disjunction in like he is realizing that he is thinking about these things, like going back to the point of like thinking and not acting. That might be a point that accelerates the point, and then I happily think on the back to the tab. Yeah.
Robin, can I ask, is that change in the rhythm, does that coincide with when he starts talking about the love? Because I noticed when he starts talking about the love,
Exactly, yeah.
the part about the dialogue, the rhythm of the disgrace is disrupted.
It's disruptive.
And so all of a sudden now he's talking about this love. And that's what he's getting at. That's how I feel.
And then it goes back to
I honestly thought about this poem less than you guys are thinking about it.
and then it goes back to the traditional sonnet, like sonnet meter with a rhyme to it. So yeah. Anyway.
It's just a poem I liked. Okay. All right. Now, here's a poem that will literally put you to sleep. So save it till last. No. This is a poem that it's an excerpt. Many of these poems are just excerpts because the full poems are really long. So I've selected the excerpts I'd most like to read. This one is Song of the Lotus Eaters by Tennyson. We haven't heard any from Tennyson yet, have we? So imagine a bunch of weary sailors or soldiers, I don't remember, and they are tired from a very long journey, and they're resting. And the lotus flower is a fictional version of the actual lotus flower, which puts you to sleep. It's in